Just like with the previous episode, I was skeptical going into Ascension of the Cybermen, and the reason for that was... well, Chris had the sole writing credit again for one thing, but also I watched the trailer, read the episode synopsis, and I just had a feeling that it was probably going to be the type of Cybermen story that I usually don't really like that much. The Cybermen episodes that I tend to love quite a bit are the ones that have a heavy emphasis on the conversion angle. That was why I thought World Enough in Time was so brilliant, because it actually puts a companion, someone who we're heavily invested in, through the conversion process. It's very important to that story that the Cybermen used to be humans. That's the point of the Cybermen, that's the emotional hook. So many Cybermen stories in Doctor Who end up being too scared to actually touch on this side of them in any real depth, because admittedly it's kinda too horrifying a concept for a kids show that these cold, emotionless machines are your future. So most Cybermen episodes usually just lightly touch on the conversion angle, and tend to just treat the Cybermen as generic robot people that march around blowing shit up and going delete, delete, delete. And I usually just end up thinking that's kinda weak by comparison to what we could be doing with them instead. Although this isn't an episode-specific complaint, and it's not even a New Who-specific complaint, and admittedly it's not always a solid one, just the Cybermen's presence on their own can work sometimes. Earthshock is basically just Cybermen marching around and killing people, and that was awesome. But going into this episode, hearing that Ascension of the Cybermen was going to be set after the Cybermen have conquered mankind and there are only a few surviving humans left, I had a feeling that the word conversion was probably not going to get much of a mention, and it was just going to be another Cybermen march around and blow shit up kind of affair. But then again, I thought, as I sat down about to watch it, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Ascension of the Cybermen will cover conversion in some way. Since this is set in a future where the Cybermen have essentially won and there are only a small handful of humans left, maybe it'll be some sort of desperate battle for the Doctor to wage against the Cybermen's attempts to convert the last remaining humans. And we can have some interesting character drama as the Cybermen pick the last surviving humans off one by one and convert them off screen, and they bring them back changed. Maybe the story starts off with 7 survivors and 1 Cyberman, but soon there's 6 survivors and 2 Cybermen. And then 5 survivors and 3 Cybermen, then 4 survivors and 4 Cybermen. That'd actually be pretty creepy and interesting. That's what I was starting to think, until they have the bunch of totally ridiculous looking Cybermen heads flying across the wasteland shooting lasers out of their eyes. Oh well, never mind. This really wasn't a good sign for me. This is of course not to say that you can't have ridiculous looking shit in a good episode. As was pointed out to me when I posted my knee-jerk reaction to the Cyberheads on Twitter, Genesis of the Daleks does feature giant stupid clams, and we all still think of Genesis as this beautiful masterpiece that doesn't have any stupid shit in it whatsoever. Thing is though, the giant clams came pretty late in Genesis of the Daleks and can kinda be ignored. This was one of the first things we saw in this episode, and they just made me laugh so damn loudly and really weren't a good sign for me going in because I was already unsure about it. And I was right to be unsure because it's Chris Chibnall, and as expected, pretty much all of the world building and characterization is done via upfront tell don't show dialogue that's there to directly tell the audience how to react to it.
We're not soldiers. I was a teacher. We got a childminder, a driver, a builder. We're just ordinary humans. Refugees. And we've all lost everything. And everyone.
You know, we can't actually show you any of what he just said because effort is hard. So let's just have him say what his backstory is over some serious music. Oh dear, isn't that a tragic backstory, everybody? Please start feeling sad now. This approach to characterization reminds me of a sketch I wrote about 4 years ago for a video that I never bothered finishing. I called the sketch The Least Specific Story Ever Told, and it basically played like this. Once upon a time, there was a character called Character. If there was one thing you could say about Character, it's that Character was a real character, with very distinctive characteristics. Honestly, it's like Chris is literally just doing that. The worst offending line like this was easily this one.
Carrying a Cyberman that makes other Cybermen scream.
Yes, I can see what's going on screen. You don't need to tell me this. Did I accidentally select audio navigation by pressing enter now? Dialogue that's there to tell the viewer how to react to what you're showing them doesn't make it more effective. If anything, it makes it less effective. I don't want to make assumptions, of course, but everything just felt so half-assed and like Chris would rather be writing anything else instead. Quite literally in the case of the Brendan stuff, which reminded me a lot of his first ever TV show that I did a video on a while back, Born and Bred. So we have this B story running parallel to the main action about a couple living in the countryside in Ireland in the 50s who find this boy on the side of the road and they take him in and raise him like he was one of their own. And the kid grows up to be a police officer and he grows into a real pillar of the community. Oh, and it turns out that he can survive being shot and falling off a cliff somehow. What this has to do with the rest of the episode, we're not told yet, and so on its own, it's completely meaningless. And so Ascension of the Cybermen felt like it had this unrelated short film about a man named Brendan cut up and stitched in between random scenes for no apparent reason, and it's so out of place. I was just really confused when the episode started with the countryside and a bloke in a flat cap and was just wondering, has Chris written an episode of Born and Bred by accident? I just felt like I had Chris going, "Look everyone, I came up with a character called Brendan. Do you like him? Please say you like him." Well, I don't care if you don't like him, Stuart. He's going in this fucking episode whether it works or not. But who is Brendan? What if he's the Rani? Or maybe he's the smoke monster? Maybe none of this is real and it's a metaphor for cyber conversion. Maybe Brendan is a secret hidden incarnation of the Doctor, like Ruth. Maybe Benny is the war Brendan. Do you really want to be setting up more mysteries and be this confusing and obtuse and distracting in part 1 of a 2-part finale? Who is Brendan was just another question that this episode didn't need. Series 12 already had so many questions and setups. Gallifrey being destroyed, the Ruth Doctor, how does the Master come back because he was always gonna, the Timeless Child, and now Brendan. And all of that just dilutes the other elements of your story because the surviving humans in this are so poorly served and their characters add nothing. The only thing this episode really spends its time doing is just asking more questions, and so the only characterization we get for our incidental characters is the occasional line of dialogue that just flat tells us this character's name, a bit of backstory, and one characteristic. If that. Although I wasn't that pissed at Brendan eating up space in the runtime that could have been spent on anything else, because I wasn't all that invested in the main story to begin with, because it was all incredibly obvious and played out. I immediately guessed that this boundary would give us a portal to Gallifrey and that the Master would come out of it, because honestly, what else would it turn out to be? I just ended up feeling like Ascension of the Cybermen was a massive waste of time. All it really does is establish that the Cybermen have mostly wiped out the human race, something that it pretty much gets out of the way with immediately in the opening narration. It introduces some characters that it doesn't give itself enough time to properly flesh out. It just shows us this cyber army. It gets the Doctor and companions from point A to point B when it could have just started them at B and been done with it. Piss about before revealing the obvious return of Gallifrey and then it fucks off for a week. Even the lone Cyberman, who should have been a saving grace, isn't done well this time. It delivers darkly poetic lines like it did last time, and it looks cool, sure, but that's about it. The episode doesn't even add anything new to the lone Cyberman. Why is it doing that welding thing to one of the dormant Cybermen and making it scream? I don't know, just to remind us that this character is supposed to be intimidating and creepy. Yeah, I got that from last week's episode, thanks. What is this adding? Ascension of the Cybermen doesn't really do anything other than ask more questions that the show didn't need, and I was so thoroughly bored and irritated by it and just expecting more from the finale. Speaking of which... oh joy, I have to make that video next, don't I? Maybe I should just make some more Brexit videos instead, that'll probably be less controversial.